The job posting was so brief it almost felt like a riddle. Discreet security personnel needed. Vatican City. Night shift. Exceptional pay. Must sign confidentiality agreement. It looked like one of those vague listings you'd expect to lead to a shady courier job or maybe babysitting an empty building. Nowhere did it mention what I would actually be watching. Nowhere did it warn me that I'd be standing guard over things that could unmake a man simply by existing too close to him. 3 months passed before the truth seeped through the veil. Father Benedetto, the old priest who supervised our detail, called me into a dim hallway after my routine patrol of the Vatican's endless marble corridors. His hands trembled slightly as he pressed a leather folder into my arms. The folder felt heavier than it should have, as if the words inside carried weight beyond paper. "Tomaso," he whispered, his voice dry and frayed like parchment. "You have proven yourself reliable. Tonight, you begin your true duties." The folder contained rules. Not guidelines, not recommendations, rules. 5 of them, printed on thick ivory paper in multiple languages, Italian, Latin, English, and scripts that looked older than anything I had seen in biblical archives. The ink shimmered faintly under the corridor lights. Father Benedetto insisted I read each rule aloud 3 times. I thought at first it was superstition, but when I spoke the words, I felt something press down on me, as though the rules themselves were alive, listening, memorizing me. The rules were simple on paper. 1. Never look directly at their faces. Keep your eyes fixed on feet or hands. 2. Always announce yourself before entering any room, and wait for acknowledgement. 3. No physical contact under any circumstances. Maintain at least 2 meters distance. 4. Speak only when spoken to. Answer with yes or no only. 5. Never turn your back on more than one at a time. Count constantly. I wanted to laugh at the strangeness of it, but Father Benedetto's eyes, wet and serious, shining with sleepless worry, froze the amusement in my throat. "These rules exist," he told me, "because the ones before you, those who broke them, did not survive." He explained the arrangement with quiet resignation. Once every month, under tightly controlled conditions, the Church offered sanctuary to entities that met here, beneath the Vatican's silence. "Your job is simple," he said, "to secure the facility and ensure protocol is never broken." That first night, my world cracked open. At midnight sharp, I stood outside the main conference hall, armed not with weapons but with a flashlight, a radio, and a leather-bound notebook to record incidents. The corridor lights had been dimmed until the marble seemed to drink the shadows. I heard them before I saw them. Footsteps echoing against stone, though not all footsteps were the same. Some were light and human. Others shuffled, dragged, or slid across the floor like fabric being pulled along by invisible hands. The air itself thickened as they entered. I kept my gaze fixed downward, watching their feet as they passed. Expensive leather shoes gleamed like mirrors. Bare feet pressed against the marble with unnatural patience, long yellowed toenails clicking like beetles. One pair of sandals looked stitched together from strips of fabric blackened with age. And then, feet covered in fine, glistening scales, catching the low light like wet armor. "Good evening," I said each time, forcing the words through a dry throat. Most ignored me. A few murmured responses, voices like whispers carried through stone tunnels, languages I could not place. They smelled faintly of things that had no right to exist inside holy walls, earth after lightning, raw iron, a sweetness like rotting fruit. The meeting began inside the hall and stretched for 4 hours. I kept to my routes, announcing myself at each doorway, waiting for faint acknowledgments that sometimes came from shadows alone. Twice I encountered attendees outside the hall. The first stood at a window overlooking the Vatican gardens. Its feet were pale and swollen, each with more toes than should belong on a human foot. When I called out, it turned slightly, and a voice slid through the air in accented English. "Security patrol." It didn't sound curious, more like a judge noting a fact. I acknowledged, and it turned away. The second encounter was worse. Near the restrooms, I announced my presence, and from behind a closed stall door came a reply. Acknowledged, guard. The voice was two voices, layered, one deep, one thin, speaking the same words at the exact same instant. I clenched the notebook in my hand until my knuckles whitened and forced myself to move on. At 4 a.m, they departed. I remained rigid by the wall, eyes locked on the marble floor. The scaled feet paused before me. You follow instructions well. The voice came from above me, not in front, as if the speaker's head was tilted too high to exist in the same geometry as mine. Father Benedetto chose wisely. Thank you, I whispered, careful, brief, rehearsed. When the last echo of footsteps dissolved, Father Benedetto emerged with steaming coffee. My report was shaky, pages smudged where my pen had pressed too hard. I told him about the 2 encounters. He nodded gravely. Excellent work, Tomaso. You will do this again next month. And so it began. Each month I watched them arrive, their strange feet a gallery of horrors. Each month I patrolled, counting, announcing, obeying. Slowly I learned patterns. The expensive shoes belonged to one who always entered first, left last. The clicking nails belonged to a restless one who moved quickly, always circling. The scaled feet, the leader, perhaps, around whom others paused, lingered, waited. But the Vatican itself changed too. Doors that were usually locked swung open on their own. Windows fogged with condensation though the night air was dry. The elevator shuddered awake with no passengers, traveling between floors as though following invisible guests. The building bent around them. The rules kept me alive. I knew one thing with certainty, they were not human. And yet, month after month, I stood among them, counting, recording, obeying, as though fear itself had been pressed into protocol. Part 2. By the 4th month, routine had dulled the sharpest edge of my fear. I thought perhaps that was the true danger, not the creatures, not the rules, but the familiarity. Routine can make you careless. That's when Salvatore arrived. He was new, younger than me by maybe a decade, with the kind of swagger men carry before the world has had the chance to carve humility into their bones. He joined me for pre-shift briefing in the security office, running a hand through his dark hair as if he'd just come from a date. Father Benedetto placed the same heavy leather folder in front of him, his lined face grave. Read them aloud, Benedetto said. Salvatore rolled his eyes, but he obeyed, voice careless as he stumbled over the Latin. When it was done, he chuckled. These are just rules for rich eccentrics, he told me later in the corridor. Secret societies love their pageantry. Dress up, masks, silly rituals. That's all this is. You'll see. I didn't argue. Some lessons don't take root until pain waters them. Near the water fountain, one of the attendees stood silently, its posture still as stone. Its feet were pale, cracked, toes bending in directions that made my stomach churn. Salvatore strode forward casually, too casually, and asked. Everything all right here? No announcement. No acknowledgement. The creature turned toward him. I caught only a flicker, a shift in the air, the suggestion of angles that didn't belong in human sight, and Salvatore froze. His skin drained white, his lips parted but no sound came. He stumbled backward, shaking his head as though trying to banish an image branded into his mind. I snapped to protocol. Security patrol, I barked, voice louder than I intended, requesting permission to proceed. A pause. Then, from that thing's mouth. Granted. I could swear I felt the word press against my ribs, vibrating from the inside out. The figure turned back to the fountain. Train your partner better. We continued in silence. Salvatore's breathing was ragged, sweat darkening the collar of his uniform. He didn't say another word for the rest of the shift. When dawn arrived and Father Benedetto asked for our report, Salvatore requested transfer to day duty. The request was granted without hesitation. I cornered him as he packed his locker. "What did you see?" I asked. He closed his bag, his hands still trembling, and looked at me with hollow eyes. "The rules exist for good reasons," he said flatly. Then he left. After that, I worked alone again. The isolation didn't bother me, if anything, I preferred it. The corridors had begun to feel like an extension of myself, the marble veined with shadows, the faint drafts whispering from locked doors that shouldn't open, the echo of my own footsteps merging with those I dared not follow. I built a ritual around the rituals. Count the attendees as they entered. Monitor the hallways with a pocket thermometer, watching for sudden drops in temperature that meant they had passed. Announce myself before every threshold. Log everything. And they noticed. Some nodded in faint approval. Some murmured words I couldn't understand. A few even paused when I announced myself, as though granting me recognition, not respect, not friendship, but the acknowledgement you might give a guard dog who never strays from his chain. The strangest part was how orderly it all was. Their chaos was bound by rules, and my role was to hold the leash tight. I began to see my work as more than survival, it was a boundary. I wasn't just guarding hallways, I was guarding the world outside from what gathered within. But the rules are brittle things, Tomaso. Bend them, and they snap. The 8th month proved that. 3 nights before the meeting, Father Benedetto summoned me to his office. His face was drawn, and 2 glasses of wine sat on his desk. He poured for both of us before speaking. "Next week will be different," he said quietly. "There will be additional attendees. The meeting may run longer than usual. And there may be visitors who are not part of the regular arrangement." He handed me a new set of rules, 5 more, printed on the same thick paper. These were marked, "Special Protocol." If anyone asks you to deliver a message, refuse politely and direct them to Father Benedetto. If you observe physical altercations, radio for backup, never intervene. If offered gifts or payment, decline and report. If electrical systems fail, use manual lighting only. If you smell sulfur or burning metal, evacuate immediately and call emergency contacts. These exist because, Benedetto explained, territorial disputes sometimes arise. Usually they resolve peacefully. Sometimes, they do not. His words lingered in me for the next 3 nights. I hardly slept. Every flicker of a shadow outside my window made me think of scales scraping marble, of whispers in languages no one was meant to know. When the night arrived, so did the storm. Rain hammered the stained glass. Thunder rattled the bones of the old stone corridors. Lightning flared, freezing the world in violent white for a breath at a time. I arrived early, checking every emergency lamp, every backup switch. My radio hissed with a low hum, like something breathing behind the static. At 11:30 p.m., the first group arrived. Polished leather shoes gleamed as always, but this time, they paused at my post. "Guard," the polished shoes said, voice firm. "Tonight may present challenges. Maintain protocol. No matter what you see." "Understood," I whispered, eyes locked downward. At midnight sharp, the second group arrived. I didn't recognize their steps. Their boots were thick-soled, heavy-looking, but produced no sound at all. They moved with military precision, each step measured. One stopped. "You are the regular guard," it said in a voice flat as stone. "You will observe neutrality tonight." "Yes." They continued. At 12:15, the third group entered late, breaking the familiar rhythm. Their approach was chaotic, footsteps fast, then dragging, overlapping like a drunken parade. I caught sight of bare feet on cold marble, some with toes blackened as if burned. "Security presence noted," one voice called from the entrance before I could announce myself. Then, almost playfully, "Stay clear of the eastern corridor tonight." The warning about the eastern corridor festered in my mind like a splinter. Rules told me to count, to observe, to remain neutral, but warnings from them carried a different weight, one I could never ignore. When the conference doors closed, the usual muffled drone of voices became something sharper, louder. For the first time, the words carried clearly through the thick oak. Arguments in a dozen tongues overlapped, Latin, German, something guttural that vibrated in the marrow of my teeth. The tones were heated, urgent, filled with the kind of hostility that made walls themselves seem to shiver. 1 hour in, the lights flickered. They dimmed to black, then returned with a faint electricum. I noted the exact time in my logbook, my pen dragging harder than usual across the paper. 30 seconds of blackout. Enough time for anything to slip loose. 2 hours in, the corridor behind me shifted. Footsteps in the east wing. At first, I thought they might be echoes from inside the hall, but the rhythm was distinct, heels clicking, then dragging, then a sound like fingernails against stone. Protocol chained me in place. I stood at the intersection, spine rigid, heart pounding against my ribs. Security patrol, I called out, voice steady despite the tremor crawling through my gut. Requesting permission to proceed. Silence stretched, thick as blood. Then a voice, distant, echoing as if spoken through a long, hollow pipe. Denied. Maintain current position. I obeyed. But the sounds did not stop. Scraping. Tapping. Something like furniture being dragged across marble, though the eastern wing contained no such furniture. At one point, I could swear I heard laughter, thin, childlike giggles that twisted midway into something animal. 20 minutes passed. I counted each second like beads on a rosary, refusing to move, refusing to breathe too loud. Then silence reclaimed the hall. By the third hour, my radio spat static. Benedetto's voice, usually a tether to sanity, was gone. I tried the backup system, dead. The channels hissed, alive with interference that felt less like technology and more like intention. As if something didn't want me to call out. The storm outside raged harder. Lightning illuminated the stained glass, casting fractured, monstrous shapes across the corridor walls. I gripped my flashlight, though I knew no beam of light could banish what walked here. At 4:30 a.m., 30 minutes past the usual closing, the heavy doors creaked open. The attendees spilled out. But this time, order had unraveled. The polished leather shoes emerged first, moving quickly, almost fleeing. As they passed my post, a voice said, "Guard. Document tonight as Code 7 incident. Benedetto will understand." Code 7. I repeated it silently, burning it into memory. The military boots followed, formation still intact, though tighter, brisker. They did not acknowledge me, but I announced myself anyway, my voice sounding alien in the charged silence. Then came the third group. Their exit was slow, uneven. Several limped, others leaned against companions for support. Their bare feet left faint smears on the marble, dark, wet. Blood, perhaps, though the color was wrong in the half-light, too thick, almost tar-like. One of them paused near me. The voice was weary, strained, but still coated in something mocking. "Successful evening," it said. But the words rang hollow. I heard the lie in them. When the last of them vanished into the storm, the building exhaled. I patrolled once more, hands shaking, and logged everything with mechanical precision. Electrical disturbances, 30 seconds. Extended duration. Communication interference. Eastern corridor activity, unknown. Departure irregularities. Code 7 incident. At dawn, Father Benedetto returned, soaked from the rain but holding coffee and pastries as if the act of breakfast could ward off the night. He read my report once, then again. His face betrayed nothing. "You performed excellently under difficult circumstances," he said finally. "The arrangement will continue, though protocols may change." "What is a Code 7 incident?" I asked. He looked at me then, really looked, his eyes dark hollows under tired lids. "A disagreement," he said, "resolved without permanent damage to facility or participants." I wanted to ask more. What kind of disagreement? Between what? Between who? But his expression told me the line of questions ended there. Still, I noticed the faintest tremor in his hand as he lifted the coffee cup. The next month, everything returned to normal. The same arrivals. The same polished shoes, clicking toenails, scaled feet. As if nothing had happened. But something had. The silence felt different. More brittle. And though Benedetto never spoke of the Code 7 incident again, my pay increased significantly. I accepted without protest. Money is useless if you're dead, and perhaps the raise was simply hazard pay. Yet deep down, I knew they had tested the boundaries that night. And the rules had held. Barely. I told myself the isolation didn't bother me, that the routine kept me safe. But a sliver of truth haunted me, gnawing at the edges of sleep. Rules were only strong until someone, or something, decided they weren't. Part 4. My first year on the job passed like a dream half-remembered, each month bleeding into the next, the rules like a rosary I repeated to keep myself anchored. Announce. Count. Eyes down. Distance. Neutrality. And yet, as the months stretched into a year, I began to see the shape of something larger forming around me. The expensive leather shoes always arrived first, always left last. The scaled feet lingered like an authority, others clustering near them during breaks. The clicking toenails darted through corridors with nervous energy, as if searching for exits no map had ever recorded. Patterns. Routines. Even nightmares have habits, I realized. But then came February of my second year, and with it, a change. 3 days before the meeting, Father Benedetto summoned me to his office. This time, he wasn't alone. A woman sat across from his desk, her black Vatican administrative uniform pressed crisp as folded paper. Her hair was pulled tight, her expression more severe than any priest's. "This is Sister Margherita," Benedetto introduced. His voice carried an undercurrent of unease. Special events coordination. She wasted no time. Sliding a manila folder across the desk, she said, "The February meeting will include a new participant. This one has requested accommodations." Inside the folder were papers stamped with seals I didn't recognize. The words were blunt, clinical: arrive 1 hour early for private consultation with Father Benedetto. I frowned. "Will this affect my duties?" "You will escort the individual from the main entrance to Father Benedetto's office," Sister Margherita replied. "Then return them to the conference hall when instructed. Standard rules apply, with one addition." She handed me a laminated card. The text was familiar in its heavy, ancient font, but the number caught my eye. Special Rule 6. If the early attendee asks about your personal life, family, background, history, respond only with information not available. Do not give them anything real. My mouth went dry. "This individual has a tendency," Benedetto explained, choosing his words carefully. "They gather personal details. The Church prefers privacy." That was all. No further elaboration. The night arrived. I reported to the entrance 2 hours early, waiting in the silence of empty marble halls. At exactly 11 p.m., the front doors groaned open. Footsteps echoed, measured, deliberate. "Security escort ready to proceed," I announced, my voice steady, though my grip on the flashlight tightened until the casing groaned. "Excellent," came the reply. The voice was pleasant. Too pleasant. Almost cheerful, like a guest arriving at a family dinner rather than a Vatican midnight summit. I kept my eyes fixed where they belonged, on the feet. Boots. Expensive, intricate, stitched from exotic leather that gleamed faintly in the low light. Their buckles and straps were lined with metalwork I couldn't place, neither modern nor antique, but something stranger. Despite their size, they made no sound against the marble. "You have worked here some time," the boot's owner said as we moved down the corridor. "Information not available," I replied immediately, the words foreign and rigid on my tongue. A pause. Then a faint chuckle. "Ah. They briefed you well. Refreshing." The rest of the walk was silent. When we reached Benedetto's office, I knocked 3 times, announced our arrival, and stepped aside. "Enter," came the priest's voice. The boots passed me, silent still, and entered. "Will you require an escort back?" I asked, my eyes never rising. "I will call you when needed," Benedetto said. And so I returned to my patrol, every step haunted by the memory of those noiseless boots. The other attendees began to arrive as normal, polished shoes, sandals, toenails clicking nervously. Yet the building itself seemed restless. Lights flickered more often than during the Code 7 incident. My radio spat static so constant I stopped trying to adjust it. At midnight, Benedetto's voice finally crackled through, "Tomaso, please return to my office for escort duties." When I entered, the air felt heavier. Benedetto looked drained, his eyes red, his hands trembling as he poured himself wine. The boots stood by the window, the moonlight gleaming faintly off their metalwork. "Escort to conference area," I announced. "Actually," the boots said, turning slightly in my direction, "I have a proposal." My breath caught. Benedetto sighed, his voice carefully measured. "This individual wishes to offer you alternative employment." I explained you are contracted to the church, but they insisted. The boots stepped closer. "Your reputation precedes you," the voice purred. "Reliable. Professional. There are opportunities beyond these walls that would triple your compensation." My heart thundered. For a moment, the thought of escape tempted me. Money. Freedom. No more corridors heavy with whispers. But Benedetto's eyes caught mine, and I remembered the rules. "I am satisfied with my current position," I replied. The boots shifted, amused. "Loyalty is admirable. Still, consider this, in other arrangements, guards are not bound by such tedious protocols. You would have autonomy, power, responsibility. More interesting work. More substantial rewards." "No," I said, firmer now. "Thank you for the offer. I decline." "No pressure," the boots chuckled, moving toward the door. "The offer remains. Circumstances change." I escorted them in silence. The meeting itself passed with only minor disturbances. Flickering lights, a faint hum through the walls, nothing more. At 4 a.m., the attendees began to leave. But the boots paused at my post. "One last question," they said. "Why decline?" Their polished leather gleamed inches from my shoes. "This work suits me," I answered carefully. The boots lingered, as if weighing my words. "Interesting. Most choose freedom. You choose rules. Perhaps you understand something most do not." Then they left. When dawn came, Benedetto appeared with coffee. I gave my report in full, including the offer. "You handled it perfectly," he said, relief flickering across his features. "Such offers are not uncommon. The church values loyalty." "What kind of work would they have offered?" I asked. "Security," he said. "For less, regulated gatherings. Higher pay. Far more dangerous. The rules here protect you, Tomaso. Never forget that." I nodded, though sleep never found me that morning. Because in the silence, I realized something. It wasn't just that the rules protected me. The rules protected everyone. After the night of the boots, things shifted in ways subtle but undeniable. The attendees began treating me differently. Before, I was a shadow, a fixture of the corridors, acknowledged only when necessary. Now, some who had never spoken a word began to murmur responses to my announcements. A nod here, a faint yes there. Not friendly, not human, but acknowledgement nonetheless. The expensive leather shoes, who I had come to think of as the de facto leader, even paused at my post one April dawn. Your refusal of outside employment was noted, the shoes said, the voice smooth but heavy with intent. Reliability includes resistance to compromise. Thank you, I replied, eyes fixed on the gleaming tips. The arrangement benefits from your consistency, it continued. Continuity serves all parties. It moved on, but the words clung to me. For the first time, I realized I was more than a guard. I was a keystone in a structure larger than myself. By my third year, Benedetto began to reveal more. One evening, after a particularly crowded gathering, 5 groups instead of the usual 3, he invited me to share coffee in his office. He unrolled a map of Vatican City across the desk, red markings scrawled across certain districts. Tomaso, he said, his voice gravelly but steady, do you understand why this arrangement exists? To provide neutral ground, I answered automatically. So the groups can meet without conflict. Correct, Benedetto nodded. But more than that, it prevents those conflicts from spilling into public spaces. Without these meetings, incidents would occur in homes, streets, markets. Innocent lives would be lost. I stared at the red circles on the map, neighborhoods, churches, even hospitals. Places filled with people who would never know how close they lived to something incomprehensible. The rules protect more than just you, Tomaso, he said softly. They protect Rome. Perhaps more. I left that night with a weight heavier than any folder. As the months wore on, the strangeness of the attendees mattered less than the purpose they served. I began to see the rules not only as shackles but as architecture, scaffolding that allowed the impossible to exist without collapse. Without them, there would be chaos. With them, there was peace. Peace in the Vatican corridors, yes. But maybe peace beyond. It was this perspective that steadied me when the next test came. During my 4th year, the church considered expanding the program. Benedetto told me others had expressed interest in adopting the model. Dioceses in other countries wanted to replicate our arrangement. You may be asked to help train new personnel, Benedetto said, his tired eyes lighting for the first time in months. Your experience is invaluable. The idea unsettled me. To train others was to accept that this arrangement was permanent, spreading like roots into the world. But I couldn't deny the truth, the system worked. The rules worked. I began drafting notes, turning my patrol rituals into lessons, announcing presence, counting constantly, maintaining neutral tone. Not just instructions, but the philosophy beneath them, respect, consistency, neutrality. The thought of others standing guard in other cathedrals, other neutral halls, felt strange. But also necessary. Then came the incident. It was an ordinary meeting, or so it began. Midnight arrivals, the familiar procession of feet, the closing of heavy doors. Hours passed without disturbance. Until 2 a.m. The sound of shattering glass tore through the stillness. I froze. The noise came from the conference hall itself. Protocol screamed in my blood. I raised my radio, called Benedetto, but only static answered. I approached the great doors, heart thundering, and announced, security responding to disturbance. Requesting status. For a breath, silence. Then voices, many voices, layered. Acknowledged. Minor accident. No assistance required. The words came in unison, like a chorus. Too smooth. Too rehearsed. I logged the incident and forced myself back to patrol. 20 minutes later, I encountered an attendee in the eastern corridor. It held one hand out, palm facing upward. A cut ran across the skin, small but wrong. The blood that seeped from it shimmered like oil on water. "Security patrol," I announced. "Yes. I require access to medical supplies," it said, voice even. Protocol guided me. I escorted it to the first aid station, keeping my eyes locked on its feet. I opened the kit, offering bandages and antiseptic. It applied them itself, never allowing my hands too close. "Thank you for your assistance," it said when finished. "You are welcome. Do you require additional care?" "No. This is sufficient." I escorted it back to the hall. Logged every detail. At dawn, when Benedetto reviewed my report, he studied the page long and hard. "You handled it correctly," he said at last. "First aid is permitted. Anything beyond requires outside medical staff." But this was minor. His reassurance did little to settle me. Because as I replayed the encounter in my mind, I remembered the glint of that blood. How it seemed to move of its own accord. Some wounds do not belong to this world. And I had bandaged one. By the end of my 4th year, I understood. This wasn't a job anymore. It was a covenant. A silent, unholy pact. And I was no longer just a guard. I was a part of it. By the time my 5th year began, the Vatican corridors no longer felt foreign to me. I knew the rhythm of the halls like the beat of my own heart, the faint draft that whispered through the eastern windows at midnight, the way the marble seemed to sweat when the meetings grew tense, the peculiar hum that preceded the elevator doors opening on their own. It should have horrified me. But routine can make monsters ordinary. Father Benedetto called me into his office for my annual review. His words carried a strange gravity that morning. "Tomaso, your service has been exemplary," he said, folding his hands together. "The attendees speak highly of your professionalism. You have not violated protocol once. I find the work rewarding," I told him truthfully. "Strange, yes. But rewarding." The priest nodded. "The church wishes to make your position permanent. You would become senior security coordinator for all special events, including the quarterly gatherings we are preparing to implement." The offer included higher pay, better benefits, and a responsibility heavier than the marble walls that surrounded us. I accepted without hesitation. "You will help train others," he said, sliding a fresh set of papers across his desk. "Use your experience to craft guidelines. Not just the rules, but the reasons behind them. If others understand why protocol exists, they will endure." I left his office with a new purpose burning in my chest. Over the next weeks, I drafted training materials. Not sterile instructions, but lessons woven with hard-earned insight. Always announce yourself, because silence breeds suspicion. Keep distance, because closeness invites contact, and contact is death. Count constantly, because in losing track, you lose control. I built exercises, scenario drills, even role-play encounters. My goal was simple, not just to teach actions, but to brand the philosophy into bone. Professionalism. Neutrality. Respect. These were not niceties. They were lifelines. When the first class of trainees completed their sessions, I personally oversaw their assignments at smaller Vatican events. Watching them move with discipline through the dim corridors, announcing themselves with clear, steady voices, I felt something rare: pride. "You have become an excellent teacher," Benedetto told me after the 3rd successful training cycle. "Your methods are being used in 3 other sites already." It struck me then, what began as a secret confined to one corner of Vatican City was spreading, a network of controlled encounters growing outward like veins. And I had become one of its architects. By December of my 5th year, I believed I had seen everything. That belief lasted until the polished leather shoes stopped at my post and broke protocol. "Guard," the voice said, lower than usual. "I have been authorized to share information that may interest you." I froze. No one had ever offered me anything beyond acknowledgement. The shoes gleamed like mirrors beneath the dim light as the voice continued. The arrangement here has become a model. 12 cities across Europe and North America now maintain similar programs. Protocols you enforce are replicated elsewhere. I forced my reply to remain professional. Thank you. I am honored to serve. More than that, the shoes added, the rules you uphold have prevented conflicts that would have torn families apart, displaced thousands. Negotiations that once ended in blood now end in words. Violence that once festered in streets is contained behind locked doors. You have helped build something far larger than you imagine. I said nothing more. I couldn't. Pride swelled in my chest, but alongside it came unease. Because the truth was now undeniable. I was not just enforcing rules. I was helping hold back a tide of violence and chaos on a scale I could barely comprehend. Later, over our ritual post-meeting coffee, I relayed the words to Benedetto. He nodded slowly, as though confirming a secret I had long suspected. It is true, he said. What began here has spread. Without these neutral grounds, the disputes of such entities would bleed into cities, into homes. You cannot know how much suffering has been prevented. How many lives? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Impossible to measure. But enough that the Church considers this one of the most successful peacekeeping initiatives in centuries. I sat in silence, the bitter coffee cooling in my hands. All I had done was follow rules. Announce. Count. Eyes down. Neutrality. And yet, somehow, that had shaped something vast. Something global. You should feel proud, Benedetto said, his gaze steady. Reliability, Tomaso, is rarer than faith. I walked home through the cobbled Roman streets as dawn broke over the city. For the first time, I did not feel like a guard patrolling haunted halls. I felt like a witness to history, history that could never be written but one that pulsed beneath the world nonetheless. The rules had begun as chains. Now, I saw them for what they truly were, a framework for coexistence between things that should never meet, but must. And I realized something else, something that chilled me even as it steadied me. The rules did not just protect me. They did not just protect Rome. They protected the world. The 6th year began with a feeling I can only describe as dread disguised as routine. By then, the Vatican's shadow corridors had become familiar territory. I walked them as if they were veins in my own body, yet familiarity is the cruelest illusion. It makes you forget how quickly the ground can vanish beneath your feet. That February, Benedetto summoned me again. But this time, the weariness in his eyes was heavier, as though he carried a weight he could no longer conceal. Tomaso, he began, his voice low, the February meeting will include a new participant. The words struck like cold iron. Change was never safe here. Sister Margherita was there too, her black suit immaculate, her posture so rigid she looked carved from stone. She slid a folder across the desk. This individual has agreed to follow protocol, but, she hesitated, they have asked for certain considerations. Inside the folder was a familiar sheet of paper. Heavy stock, ornate ink. But the number was new. Special Rule 6. If the early attendee asks questions about your personal life, family, or history, you will respond only with information not available. No exceptions. I looked at Benedetto, silently demanding an explanation. They seek knowledge, he said, eyes dark. Details. Patterns. They gather threads, and once woven, those threads cannot be unspooled. The Church insists on privacy. He said no more. And yet I knew that if this individual asked me about my mother's maiden name, or the color of the street I grew up on, I must deny it. Because to give them truth would be to give them power. The night arrived. I stood at the main entrance, uniform immaculate, notebook steady in my hand. At exactly 11 p.m., the great doors opened. The sound of footsteps echoed across the marble. Not the hesitant scraping of toenails, not the slithering shuffle of sandals. These steps were confident, deliberate, each one resonant as though the stone itself acknowledged them. "Security escort ready to proceed," I announced. "Excellent," came the reply. The voice was warm, pleasant, even cheerful. And that unsettled me most of all. I lowered my gaze to the feet. Boots. Polished to a mirror sheen, made of leather that shimmered in hues I couldn't quite place, like oil on water. Intricate buckles glinted faintly with symbols that seemed to crawl the longer I looked. Yet the boots made no sound when they moved. Not even the whisper of friction against marble. We walked in silence at first. My pulse hammered in my ears, but I kept my gaze fixed and my posture steady. "You have worked here long," the boots said casually. "Information not available," I replied at once. A pause. Then a chuckle, low and amused. "Ah. They prepared you well. Refreshing." The rest of the walk stretched in silence, the kind that gnaws at nerves. At Benedetto's office, I knocked 3 times and announced our arrival. "Enter," Benedetto's voice called. The boots crossed the threshold. I stepped aside. "Will you require escort back?" I asked, eyes never rising. "I will call you when needed," Benedetto answered. The door shut. I returned to my patrol, though every shadow in the corridor seemed to bend toward me, listening. The other attendees arrived at their usual time. The sandals, the clicking toenails, the polished leather shoes. And yet something in the air felt wrong, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Lights flickered more violently than ever before. My radio hissed with a constant, needling static, like whispers layered atop one another. At 12:30, Benedetto's voice crackled faintly through. "Tomaso, return to my office. Escort duties." When I entered, the room felt suffocated, as though the air itself had grown heavier. Benedetto stood at his desk, pouring wine with shaking hands. The boots stood near the window, moonlight silvering their buckles. "Escort to conference area," I announced. "Actually," the boots said, turning slightly toward me, "I have a proposal." I froze. Benedetto sighed. "They wish to offer you alternative employment." I told them you were bound to the church, but they insisted. The boots stepped closer, the glint of metalwork sharp in the low light. "Your reputation is spoken of, Tomaso. Reliable. Disciplined. There are circles where such qualities are rare. If you chose, you could earn triple your pay." For a moment, temptation burned through me. Escape. Freedom. To leave these marble corridors behind forever. But then Benedetto's eyes caught mine. They pleaded without words. "I am satisfied with my position," I said carefully. "Loyalty," the boots murmured, amused. "A rare virtue. Still, consider this, other arrangements grant autonomy. Power. Responsibility. The work is more interesting." "No," I said. "Thank you. I decline." "No pressure," the boots chuckled softly. "The offer remains, should your circumstances change." I escorted them in silence. The meeting stretched for 4 hours. At dawn, the attendees began to depart. But the boots stopped at my post, polished tips gleaming faintly. "One last question," they said. "Why refuse?" I steadied my breath. "This work suits me." The boots shifted. "Interesting. Most prefer freedom. You prefer rules. Perhaps you understand something most never do: structure is not prison. It is survival." And then they left. That morning, Benedetto sat across from me, coffee trembling in his hand. "You handled it perfectly," he said. "Such offers come often. Dangerous offers. The church values loyalty. I asked him what kind of work they would have offered. Security, he said. For less, moderated gatherings. No rules. More money. More danger. The protocols here exist to protect you, Tomaso. Without them, you would not last a single night. I nodded. But long after, as I walked home through Rome's dawn streets, one thought clung like a thorn in my flesh. If there are regulated meetings, how many are there that are not? The months after the Boots incident passed in uneasy calm, though something intangible had shifted. It was as if, by refusing that offer, I had marked myself. Attendees who had once passed without acknowledgement began to glance toward me, if only slightly. Their responses to my announcements were sharper, more deliberate. The expensive leather shoes, the one I had come to see as a leader, paused at my post one dawn and spoke words that echoed long after the marble cooled beneath my boots. Your refusal was noted, the shoes said. Reliability is not obedience, it is resistance to temptation. You maintain balance by existing outside the tug of influence. Such guards are scarce. I bowed my head, careful. Thank you. You may not grasp it fully, the voice continued, but your neutrality preserves the very foundation of this arrangement. And then, silence, footsteps receding, leaving me alone with the echo of a truth I wasn't sure I wanted. By my third year, the weight of that truth became harder to ignore. I was no longer just watching corridors, I was holding something far larger together. After a particularly tense gathering involving 5 groups instead of 3, Benedetto invited me to his office. We sat across from one another, steam rising from our coffee. He unrolled a map of Vatican City, scarred with red circles marking places I knew well, piazzas, basilicas, residential quarters. Tomaso, he said softly, do you understand the real purpose of these meetings? To prevent conflict within the Vatican. I guessed. He tapped one of the red marks with a trembling finger. Not just here. Without these meetings, disagreements spill outward. Into homes. Streets. Schools. Innocents would suffer. I stared at the map, realizing the circles marked potential outbreaks. Unseen wars that never reached daylight, because they were suffocated inside these stone corridors. The rules you follow, Benedetto said, voice heavy, protect more than you know. They are not just for you. They are for Rome. For the world. It unsettled me, this widening of scope. What began as strange employment was now a peacekeeping initiative. The marble walls weren't just stone, they were barriers holding back storms that would otherwise drown cities. And I, Tomaso Alberti, was one of the locks keeping those doors shut. By the 4th year, expansion was no longer just talk. The program is spreading, Benedetto explained one night after the meeting. Other dioceses have expressed interest. Paris. Vienna. Munich. They want their own arrangements. And me. I asked carefully. You may help train their guards, he said. Your experience cannot be wasted. The thought of others, far away, standing in dimly lit halls with their eyes glued to the ground, announcing themselves into shadows, it chilled me. But I knew it was inevitable. So I began to draft manuals. Not just sterile bullet points, but philosophy disguised as protocol. Announce yourself, because silence invites suspicion. Keep distance, because closeness breeds hunger. Count constantly, because in losing track, you lose control. I shaped drills and scenarios, forcing trainees to memorize not just rules but the meaning within them. A rule followed blindly can snap. A rule understood becomes unbreakable. The first time I observed my trainees in the field, patrolling small Vatican events, I felt something close to pride. They announced firmly. They paused when acknowledged. They carried the neutrality I had carved into them. You've become a teacher, Benedetto said, his tired face cracked by something close to a smile. Your lessons will echo far from here. And I realized with cold certainty, What began as one guarded hall in Vatican City was becoming a lattice of controlled sanctuaries across Europe. We were building a system. Then, one night, the system faltered. The February meeting of my 4th year began like any other. Midnight arrivals. Footsteps in the marble gloom. 4 hours of muffled voices behind the heavy oak doors. But at 2 a.m., glass shattered. It was sharp, violent, impossible to ignore. I froze outside the hall, my hand tightening on the radio. Security responding to disturbance, I called. Requesting status. Silence. Then, voices. Many voices, layered into one, speaking in unison. Acknowledged. Minor accident. No assistance required. Too smooth. Too rehearsed. I logged it and forced myself to continue my patrol, but unease clawed at me. 20 minutes later, I found one of the attendees in the eastern corridor. Its hand dripped with a shallow cut, blood shimmering like liquid mercury under the weak emergency lights. Security patrol, I announced. Yes, it said calmly. I require access to medical supplies. Protocol guided me. I escorted it to the first aid station, eyes glued to its feet, bare, skin pale, nails cracked. I set the kit on the table. It bandaged itself, movements too precise, too deliberate. Thank you for your assistance. You are welcome. Do you require further care? No. This is sufficient. I escorted it back, my throat dry. When Benedetto read my report later, his brows knitted but his voice remained calm. You handled it correctly. First aid is acceptable. Beyond that, you must never attempt. Some wounds, he said, I shadowed, do not belong to our world. The words lodged deep, festering. Because I had seen that shimmering blood. And I knew he was right. As I ended my 4th year, the realization sank like a stone in my chest. I was no longer a guard at all. I was part of the covenant. A keeper of balance. A silent participant in something vast and fragile. And though I had never chosen it, it had claimed me all the same. By the 5th year, the work no longer felt like a job, it had become a ritual. Each month, the patterns repeated, the midnight arrivals, the steady patrol, the whispered acknowledgments. But beneath the repetition, something darker grew. The rules were no longer just instructions on paper. They had seeped into me, bone deep, shaping my every thought. When Benedetto summoned me for my annual review, he spoke words that sealed my fate. Tomaso, he said, his voice heavy but proud, the Church wishes to grant you permanence. You will oversee all special gatherings. Not just here, but elsewhere. You will train others. I accepted. What else could I do? By then, my life outside these walls had shrunk into a ghost of itself. The corridors were my world. The rules were my family. And Benedetto. Benedetto was my confessor, my anchor, my judge. The following weeks were spent drafting comprehensive training materials. But I didn't just list rules. I bled meaning into them. Speak only when spoken to, not because silence is respect, but because words have weight, and some ears twist truth into weapons. Never turn your back, not because you dishonor them, but because unseen eyes devour what they are denied. Never look at their faces, not because they forbid it, but because to look is to invite recognition. And recognition is a bond you do not want. I taught my trainees these truths. I told them stories, not embellishments, but shards of memory carved into parables. I saw fear in their eyes, yes, but also understanding. For the first time, I realized I had become not just a guard but a priest of the rules. When the first trainees graduated and were deployed to other dioceses, I accompanied them. Watching them walk corridors in Paris and Vienna, announcing themselves into the dark, their voices steady even when the shadows pressed close, it was like watching my reflection ripple outward. You are an excellent teacher, Benedetto told me later. The principles you crafted are spreading. This program will not die with us. The thought filled me with pride, but also dread. Because systems expand until they break. The December meeting of my 5th year was the one that broke me. The expensive leather shoes, the leader, stopped at my post before entering the hall. "Guard," the voice said, lower than ever. "I have been authorized to share something with you." The polished shoes gleamed like mirrors, catching the dim light. "The arrangement here has become a model. 12 cities now use your protocols. Negotiations once drowned in blood now end with words. Entire conflicts have been avoided. Families remain whole because you obeyed." I felt my chest tighten. "Thank you," I said carefully, though pride burned like fire beneath my skin. "You should know," the shoes continued, "the lives spared number in the thousands. Perhaps more. You have prevented suffering you will never see." And then it moved on, vanishing into the heavy doors. That dawn, I sat with Benedetto, coffee steaming between us. "What they told me," I began. "It's true," he said, cutting me off gently. "Your reliability has echoed far beyond these walls. Innocents will never know the danger you kept from them. But Tomaso," his gaze darkened, "never confuse pride with safety. One mistake, one broken rule, and everything falls." His words struck hard. For though I had been praised, though my work had multiplied across continents, a question gnawed at me. If these arrangements are so successful, what happens when they fail? Because systems do not last forever. I walked home through Rome as dawn spilled gold across the cobblestones. The city stirred, alive with vendors and pilgrims and tourists who would never know how close they slept to horrors. The rules had carried me through 5 years. They had given me structure, purpose, meaning. But as I passed a child chasing pigeons through St. Peter's Square, I felt an ache I hadn't known in years. The rules protected me. They protected Rome. They protected the world. But what would protect us when the rules broke? The 6th year began not with ceremony, but with silence. A silence that pressed against my ribs as though the very air had thickened. By then, the rules had consumed me so thoroughly that even outside the Vatican, I found myself obeying them. I announced myself softly before entering my own apartment rooms. I kept my eyes lowered when strangers passed too close on the street. I counted footsteps when I walked alone at night. The rules had ceased to be instructions. They had become instinct. And maybe that's why I missed the signs at first. The February meeting of my 6th year was different. I should have sensed it in the atmosphere days before, the way the air in the hallways seemed colder, how the lights flickered even during the day, how Benedetto avoided my eyes whenever we crossed paths. 3 nights before the gathering, he summoned me again. But this time, he was not alone. Sister Margherita sat rigid in her black suit, a folder before her. "There will be another early arrival," she said, voice as sharp as glass. "You will escort them directly to Benedetto's office. Then to the hall. But there is a new rule." She slid the laminated card toward me. The same heavy lettering. The same weight of command. Special Rule 7. If an attendee speaks to you in the voice of someone you love, do not respond. Continue as though nothing was said. My throat closed. Why? Benedetto silenced me with a raised hand. Some test the boundaries. They know where the rules end. Do not let them. I nodded. But inside, I felt the first crack in the armor routine had built around me. The night arrived. I waited at the entrance, uniform sharp, notebook ready. At exactly 11 p.m., the doors opened. The boots returned, the same boots, noiseless against marble, their metal buckles catching the dim light like a smile of teeth. "Security escort ready," I announced. "Excellent," the pleasant voice replied, warm as always. But beneath it, I thought I heard something else. A second voice. Higher, fainter. Familiar. It was my mother's voice. Tomaso, mio figlio, you've been gone too long. The words slid under my skin, chilling me to the core. But I kept my eyes locked on the boots. My pen dug into my palm. Information not available, I told myself. Information not available. We walked in silence. When we reached Benedetto's office, I knocked 3 times. Enter, came his voice, tired, strained. The boots stepped through. For an instant, the mother voice whispered again. You don't belong here, Tomaso. Come home. I clenched my jaw until I tasted blood. I did not answer. The meeting stretched on. Inside the hall, the voices rose higher than usual, arguments, snarls, words that rattled the chandeliers. Outside, the storm raged again, lightning cutting the corridors into violent flashes. At 2:17 a.m., the lights went out completely. My flashlight flickered, weak, as I heard movement from the eastern corridor. Footsteps, but more than footsteps, dragging, crawling, the sound of many limbs where there should have been 2. I froze at my post. Protocol burned in my skull. Security patrol, I called into the dark. Requesting permission to proceed. The answer came immediately. Denied. Maintain position. The voice was my mother's. The blood in my veins turned to ice. My lips pressed shut. I gripped my flashlight like a weapon and did not move. For 20 minutes, the corridor seethed with sounds I could not describe, bones clicking, wet fabric tearing, a low chant in a language that made the air feel sharp. Then silence. When the lights returned, I forced myself to write in my logbook, though the pen shook so violently the words tore the paper. 2:17, blackout. Eastern corridor activity. Voices attempting manipulation. At dawn, the attendees filed out. The polished shoes were first. They paused at my post. You held to the rules, the voice said, low and grave. That is why you are still here. Then the boots emerged last. Their buckles gleamed, their steps silent. They stopped before me. You resisted, the boots murmured. Few do. Most answer. Most break. I said nothing. My throat was too tight to speak. You will be tested again, Tomaso, the voice said softly, almost kindly. Sooner than you think. And then it was gone. Benedetto met me in his office after sunrise. His face was pale, more lined than I had ever seen. He read my log, his fingers trembling on the paper. You did well, he whispered. Rule 7 saved you. Saved me from what? I asked, voice raw. His eyes met mine, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw fear, not of death, but of truth. From being known, he said. I did not ask more. I didn't need to. Because I already felt it, like invisible fingers tracing the edges of my thoughts. Something out there knew my name. And it would not forget. Part 11. Sleep became impossible after that February night. Even in my own apartment, miles from the Vatican's walls, I felt the echo of her voice, the voice that wasn't hers, curling into my ear when the city fell silent. Mio figlio, come home. I locked my doors, drew the curtains, left lights burning through the night. It didn't matter. The words followed me, soft as breath against the nape of my neck. For the first time since I had taken the job, I began to wonder whether survival through obedience was enough. Because what do rules matter, when the thing you obey learns to wear your mother's voice? The March meeting arrived too soon. I arrived at the Vatican early, trying to steady myself through routine, check the backup lamps, count the corridors, rehearse the rules under my breath like prayer. Father Benedetto pulled me aside before the attendees arrived. His face was pale, his eyes ringed with sleepless shadow. Tomaso, he said, there will be turbulence tonight. You must remain steady. What kind? I asked. He shook his head. Do not ask. Just hold to protocol. No matter what. Then he pressed something into my palm, a rosary, its beads cold as ice. Keep this with you, he whispered. It may not protect you, but it will remind you where you stand. At midnight, the arrivals began. The polished leather shoes came first, as always, but their pace was hurried, almost clipped. Guard, the voice said, document all anomalies tonight. Every one. Then came the clicking toenails, rapid and restless, darting into the hall without a sound in reply. The scaled feet entered slowly, deliberately. Others clustered near them, the air tightening as though acknowledging rank. And then, 15 minutes late, the boots arrived. The silent boots, gleaming with their impossible buckles. As they passed, the voice whispered so low I almost thought it was in my skull. You resisted once. But voices multiply. Inside the conference hall, the meeting erupted almost immediately. Usually their tones were measured, almost bored. Tonight the air quaked with anger. Multiple groups shouting. Languages clashing. Words and cadences that no throat should shape. I patrolled the outer halls, announcing myself at intervals, my voice raw from the effort. Security patrol. Requesting permission to proceed. Acknowledgements came, but fractured, hurried, some overlapping as though several mouths spoke from the same body. At 1:42 a.m., a sound rattled through the building, an inhuman wail, deep and resonant, like a horn bellowed from beneath the earth. The stained glass windows trembled in their frames. My flashlight flickered, weak. Security patrol, I whispered, my voice faltering. No acknowledgement. Instead, laughter. Childlike giggles from the far corridor, the same mocking sound I had heard during the Code 7 incident. And then, her voice again. My mother's. Clear as if she stood behind me. Tomaso, don't leave me here. Please, look at me. The rosary burned cold in my palm. I clenched it until the beads cut into my skin. Information not available, I muttered through clenched teeth. The giggling stopped. The air grew still. At 3 a.m., the hall doors burst open, not wide, just enough for something to slip through. A figure stumbled into the corridor. Bare feet streaked the marble with dark stains. Its gait was broken, irregular, as though its bones bent wrong. I froze, my chest hammering. Protocol demanded I announce myself, but terror pinned me silent. It turned its head slightly, not enough for me to see its face, but enough that I felt the pull, that invisible tug at my skull. Security patrol, I forced out, choking on the words. The figure paused. Its voice was layered, 2 tones at once, permission granted. Then it moved on, vanishing into shadow. I sank against the wall, sweat soaking through my uniform. The meeting ended late, 5 a.m., nearly an hour beyond usual. The attendees left in silence, their footsteps hurried, uneven. The polished shoes offered no words this time. The boots lingered at my post, though, gleaming faintly. You did not answer, the voice said softly. Good. But they know now. They know you can hear them. The boots turned, vanishing into the rain. At dawn, Benedetto sat hunched over my report, his hands trembling. You held the line, he whispered. Barely. But you did. What happens when the rules aren't enough? I asked. My voice cracked, raw from hours of forced calm. He looked at me then, and I swear for the first time I saw tears in his eyes. Then we pray, Tomaso. We pray the rules hold one more night. I left his office with the rosary still cutting into my palm, blood from my clenched grip staining the beads. For the first time in years, I wondered whether the rules weren't protecting me at all. Maybe they were only delaying the inevitable. By the 7th year, I had learned something terrible about fear: it adapts. It bends and reshapes itself until the once unthinkable becomes background noise. The giggles in empty corridors, the flicker of lights, the scrape of scaled feet, these things had once shredded my nerves. Now, I recorded them calmly in my notebook, my handwriting steady even as shadows whispered. But the voices were different. They were learning me. April came with rain, hammering the Vatican windows in endless gray sheets. I arrived early, running my checks with practiced precision. Lamps. Functional. Radio. Static already, though still usable. Backup logs. Updated. Father Benedetto stopped me in the hall before midnight. His skin looked waxy, his shoulders slumped beneath his cassock. He pressed a folded slip of paper into my hand. "Do not read this unless the rules fail," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, stripped of strength. "What's inside?" I asked. He shook his head. "The last safeguard. Pray you never open it." His eyes lingered on mine longer than usual. In them, I saw something I had never seen in him before. Not authority. Not discipline. Resignation. That night, 3 groups arrived as usual. The polished shoes. The clicking toenails. The scaled feet with their entourage. But all 3 carried an urgency I had never felt before, footsteps quicker, exchanges shorter, their silence heavier. I logged it all. Protocol first, always. Then, at 12:48 a.m., the boots returned. They approached slower this time, every step deliberate. Their voice carried softly above the storm outside. "Tomaso Alberti," it said. My full name. My stomach twisted. They had never used it before. "Your reliability has become renowned." But reliability without choice is simply conditioning. Tonight, we will see whether you follow rules because you must, or because you believe. I swallowed hard, my pen trembling in my hand. Security patrol. Escort ready to proceed. A chuckle. Low, almost approving. Good. Still the professional. We shall see. Inside, the meeting was louder than ever. Raised voices in languages human and not. The chandeliers trembled. For the first time, I thought the stone itself might crack. At 2 a.m., I patrolled near the eastern corridor, the one they always warned against. And there she was again. My mother. Or the mask of her. She stood barefoot, her toes pale against the marble, her nightgown damp as if soaked by rain. Her hair was exactly as I remembered when I was a boy. "Tomaso," she whispered, her voice trembling, "real. Too real. You've been gone so long. Please, just look at me." My throat burned. My chest ached. I wanted to believe, desperately, hungrily, that she had somehow found her way here. But Rule 7 coiled in my mind like barbed wire. If an attendee speaks to you in the voice of someone you love, do not respond. I lowered my eyes to her feet. They twitched unnaturally, toes bending backward as though joints had been reversed. "Security patrol," I said, forcing the words past the stone lodged in my chest. "Requesting acknowledgement." The voice broke, crying now. "Please, son, don't turn away from me. It's me. It's your mother." My knuckles whitened on the flashlight. "Requesting acknowledgement." The voice snapped then, low and guttural, layered with something monstrous. "Permission granted." I logged it, hand trembling, and walked past. But her sobs followed me down the hall, gnawing at my ears until I wanted to tear them off. At 3:15 a.m., the building shook. Not from thunder. From inside. The chandeliers rattled violently, dust falling from the vaulted ceiling. My radio screeched static. And from the conference hall came a roar, so deep it made the glass in the windows spiderweb. The doors shuddered, but did not open. I clutched the folded paper Benedetto had given me, feeling its edges cut into my palm. My mind screamed to open it, to break the seal and finally learn what lay inside. But the rules, always the rules, chained me. Do not break protocol unless commanded. So I did not. I simply stood in the corridor, trembling as the Vatican itself seemed ready to collapse. When dawn finally came, the attendees exited in silence, their footsteps uneven, hurried. Some limped. Some dragged others by the arm. None spoke to me, not even the polished shoes. Only the boots lingered. They stopped before me, gleaming. You held fast, the voice said. But how long will obedience hold, when the voices become truth? I said nothing. I couldn't. My mouth was dry, my tongue heavy. The boots turned and vanished into the gray rain. Afterward, Benedetto met me in his office. His hands shook as he read my log. He asked no questions about the folded paper. He didn't need to. I hadn't opened it. You obeyed, he whispered. And that is why you are alive. But his eyes betrayed something worse than fear. He had not expected me to make it through the night. By my 7th year, the rules no longer felt like commandments from the church. They had become something else, sacred laws, etched not in ink but in marrow. To follow them was survival. To break them was death. And yet, each month, I felt them fraying. The attendees no longer carried only their strange dignity and silence. They carried something heavier. A pressure. As though every gathering strained against the fragile frame of marble and protocol, threatening to burst outward into the streets of Rome. It was in June when Benedetto finally broke his own silence. We sat together after a meeting that had ended with whispers louder than thunder, our coffee trembling in our cups. His hands shook so badly he spilled half of his. Tomaso, he rasped, the rules are not enough anymore. The words struck harder than any horror I had seen in those corridors. What do you mean? He leaned closer, his breath smelling of wine. They adapt. They test. They probe for weakness. The rules are barriers. But even barriers erode. I thought of the boots, whispering my name. Of my mother's voice, begging me to look. Of the folded paper still sealed in my pocket, the so-called last safeguard. Then what do we do? I asked. His eyes glistened with defeat. We pray the barriers last long enough for something else to be built. July came with suffocating heat. Inside the Vatican, the air was heavy, clinging like damp cloth. That night, the attendees arrived restless, their footsteps uneven, hurried. The polished shoes did not pause at my post. The clicking toenails scuttled quickly past. Even the scaled feet seemed to tremble, their scales dull in the faint light. And then, halfway through the meeting, the sound began. A tapping. Steady. Measured. Coming from the walls themselves. At first I thought it was the storm outside, rain hammering stone. But no, the night was clear. The tapping came from inside the marble. I followed protocol. I logged the time. I announced my presence. Security patrol. Requesting acknowledgement. From the shadows, a voice replied. Not human. Not monstrous. Something in between. Acknowledged. The tapping stopped. But the silence that followed was worse. At 2:34 a.m., I turned a corner in the north wing and froze. There were more of them than usual. Attendees that should have been inside the hall now stood clustered in the corridor, their feet pale, cracked, twitching. They stood shoulder to shoulder, unmoving, a silent barricade. Security patrol, I said, voice barely a whisper. Requesting permission to proceed. The reply came not from one, but from all. A chorus, perfectly synchronized. Denied. They did not move. Did not breathe. Only stood, as though testing how close I would come to breaking protocol. I logged it, retreated, and did not pass that way again. At dawn, as always, the attendees left. But their departure was jagged, chaotic. Some stumbled. Some dragged their feet. One pair of sandals left dark streaks across the marble. And the boots, always the boots, stopped at my post. "Do you understand now?" the voice asked. "Understand what?" I whispered. "That rules are not cages. They are currency. And currency loses value when the market shifts." The boots turned, their buckles gleaming like knives, and disappeared into the gray Roman dawn. Benedetto was waiting for me in his office. He looked older than I had ever seen him, his skin translucent, his eyes sunken. "You logged the cluster in the north wing," he said. "Yes." He nodded, weary. "That was a test. Of you. Of the rules. They are searching for cracks." I remembered the folded paper in my pocket. Heavy. Waiting. "What happens when they find one?" I asked. Benedetto's hands trembled as he poured the coffee. His voice was barely a whisper. "Then Rome burns." August brought with it a kind of suffocating stillness, the kind of heat that makes even the air feel diseased. Rome baked under a sky the color of dull brass, and yet inside the Vatican, the corridors were colder than ever. My thermometer recorded temperatures that dropped 10, 15 degrees at random intervals. And each drop was accompanied by whispers I pretended not to hear. I lived only for the rules now. My notes were a litany: announce, count, distance, neutrality. The words were no longer written just for protocol, they were carved into me, anchors keeping me from drifting into madness. But anchors only hold if the seabed remains. The August gathering began at midnight as usual. Yet even in their strangeness, the attendees seemed unsettled. The polished shoes, normally unshakable, scuffed against marble with hurried steps. The clicking toenails clicked faster, nervously, like insect legs skittering. Even the scaled feet, usually so deliberate, dragged slightly, scales dull in the candlelight. When I logged it, my pen nearly tore through the paper. At 1:06 a.m., the lights died completely. Not a flicker this time. Total darkness. The flashlight in my hand sputtered and failed. I was swallowed whole by blackness. I stood frozen in the corridor, announcing myself into the void. "Security patrol. Requesting acknowledgement." From the dark, a voice replied. But it wasn't one voice. It was dozens. All speaking my name. Tomaso. 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 Layered, overlapping, some whispering, some growling, some sighing like breath against my ear. My knees nearly buckled. My chest locked tight. Rule 7 burned in my head: if they use the voice of someone you know, do not respond. But this wasn't one voice. It was all voices. The folded paper in my pocket felt heavy, begging to be opened. I gripped it until my knuckles cracked, but I didn't unfold it. Instead, I forced the words out, my voice breaking. Requesting acknowledgement. The chorus fell silent. Then, after what felt like hours, permission granted. The lights flared back to life. The corridor was empty. But my logbook bore the indentations of my pen, dug deep into the page where I had written my own name over and over again without realizing it. The meeting did not end at 4 a.m. as usual. It dragged into dawn. By 6, I was trembling with exhaustion, but I held my post. Finally, the doors opened. The attendees left in chaos, some limping, some silent, some muttering words too jagged to belong in human throats. And then the boots emerged. They stopped before me, polished leather gleaming faintly, buckles catching the weak dawn light. "You heard them," the voice said. I said nothing. My jaw was locked. They know you now. Names are keys, Tomaso. And once a door has a key. The boots lingered. I smelled something faint, sulfur, metallic, sweet, all at once. Someone will try to open it. Then they turned, leaving me alone in the echoing corridor. Benedetto's office smelled of old wine and incense. His hands shook as he read my report. When he reached the line where I described the voices speaking my name, he pressed his palms to his face. "You must open the paper soon," he said quietly. I stiffened. "You told me never." "I told you not to unless the rules failed," he said, lowering his hands. His eyes were red, rimmed with tears I had never seen before. "Tomaso, they are failing." I touched the folded paper in my pocket, feeling its edges cut into my skin. "What's inside?" I whispered. His gaze dropped to the floor. "The name of the one thing they fear." I felt my stomach turn. Because if creatures like this feared anything, then that thing was worse than they were. And I was not sure whether invoking it would save me, or damn me. September bled into October, and with it came a heaviness I cannot describe. Rome itself felt wrong, shadows longer than they should be, bells tolling at strange intervals, flocks of birds scattering violently from rooftops with no visible cause. But inside the Vatican, the weight was unbearable. The rules still worked, yes, but only just. It was like patching cracks in a dam with wax while water roared against it. The folded paper never left my pocket. I carried it like a relic, its presence at once reassuring and poisonous. Benedetto's words haunted me, the name of the one thing they fear. Each night I imagined opening it. Each night I resisted. Because what if speaking that name did not save me, but instead summoned it? The October gathering began under a red moon. Its glow cut through the stained glass, bleeding across the marble like spilled wine. I stood at my post, notebook steady, though my hands shook. The attendees arrived restless, uncoordinated. The polished shoes moved too quickly, not pausing to acknowledge me. The clicking toenails skittered like they were fleeing something unseen. Even the scaled feet stumbled once, a detail so shocking I nearly forgot to log it. At 1:23 a.m., the air itself changed. Not colder. Not hotter. Heavier. It pressed against my chest, forced my breath shallow. The chandeliers swayed though no wind touched them. And then, silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of everything holding its breath. From inside the conference hall, a single voice boomed. It was not language. It was vibration, rolling through the stone, rattling my bones. The windows trembled. The marble under my boots groaned. And then came the reply, many voices, shouting at once, so loud I dropped my notebook. The doors shook. Cracks spidered along the wood. Protocol told me to stay at my post. To announce myself if I moved. To not intervene. But my legs betrayed me. I found myself inching closer to the great oak doors, my rosary clutched so tightly the beads snapped one by one. The voices inside were not speaking, they were tearing at each other. And then... bang. Glass shattered somewhere deep in the building. A scream followed, high-pitched, metallic, nothing human. I raised my radio. Static. "Security patrol," I shouted, my voice trembling. "Requesting acknowledgement." From behind the door, a voice answered. But it was my own voice. Acknowledged. I froze. Every hair on my body bristled. My knees nearly gave way. My voice again, mocking, from within the hall. "Permission granted, Tomaso." The folded paper in my pocket pulsed like a heartbeat. I felt it through the fabric, almost burning. For the first time in 7 years, I considered breaking protocol. But I didn't. I stumbled back, my notebook forgotten on the floor, my eyes locked on the doors that now quivered like living flesh. At dawn, the attendees left in shambles. Some crawled. Some were carried. The polished shoes limped, scuffed, their voice nothing but a whisper, Code 7, escalating. And then the boots appeared. Untouched. Gleaming. They stopped in front of me. You heard yourself, the voice said. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't speak. They are peeling you, Tomaso. Layer by layer. Soon, they will not need to wear your mother's voice. They will wear you. The boots lingered, silent for a long moment. Then, softly, opened the paper. And then they left. Benedetto did not meet me with coffee that morning. He was in his office, hunched over his desk, the folded skin of his hands pressed against his face. When he looked up, his eyes were hollow. They spoke in your voice, he whispered. I nodded, trembling. Then it is almost time. He pushed his own notebook across the desk toward me. Its pages were brittle, ink blurred with age. I opened it. Inside were logs, like mine. Identical entries stretching back decades. Names of guards before me. The last entry was dated 20 years earlier. It read, they used my voice tonight. Father Benedetto says the rules are failing. He gave me the paper. I have not opened it yet. The signature beneath it was smudged. But the name was clear. Salvatore. I felt my stomach twist. My partner. The one who had begged for transfer. The one who had told me, the rules exist for good reasons. He hadn't left. He had stayed. And the paper had been passed to him before me. Where is he? I whispered. Benedetto closed his eyes. Gone. Consumed. The paper passed to the next. And now, to you. I clutched the folded slip, my pulse roaring in my ears. Because now I knew the truth. The paper was not salvation. It was inheritance. By November, I no longer dreamed. Sleep had become nothing but a black well I avoided, because whenever I slipped into it, I heard my own voice whispering from the dark. Not words, just breathing. A steady rasp, in rhythm with mine, but never mine. I lived on bitter coffee and ritual. The rules were the only walls holding me upright, and even they felt thin, stretched. Sometimes I swore I could hear them creak, as though unseen hands were prying at their edges. The folded paper weighed heavier in my pocket each night. Not parchment anymore, lead. The November meeting began under skies that bled. A storm swelled over Rome, lightning stabbing the heavens while rain slashed against the stained glass. I arrived 2 hours early, checked my lamps twice, logged every corridor temperature with obsessive precision. At 11:47, Benedetto approached. He looked skeletal, his cassock hanging loose on his frame. His voice rasped like torn cloth. Tomaso. Tonight you may need the paper. I stared at him, trembling. You said only if the rules failed. His eyes locked on mine, hollow but burning. And what do you think has been happening, my son? He placed a shaking hand on my shoulder. His fingers were cold, papery. If you open it, speak the name only once. Clearly. But know this, some names summon, some banish. You won't know which until it answers. Then he left me alone with my terror. Midnight. The doors groaned open. The polished shoes arrived first, but their stride was broken, uneven. Guard, the voice hissed, breathless. Tonight, hold steady. The clicking toenails came scuttling next, erratic, skipping beats as if dragging something invisible behind them. The scaled feet lingered, condensation pooling on the marble with each step, leaving wet, shimmering streaks. And then, last, the boots. Polished. Silent. Unharmed. They stopped at my post. You still carry it, the voice said, almost gently. The name in your pocket. I froze. My throat dried. Do you think names save you, Tomaso? Or do you think they change you? I said nothing. The rules anchored me. Speak only when spoken to. Answer yes or no. Yes, I whispered finally, because silence felt worse. A chuckle. Soft. Then tonight you will learn what kind of name it is. The meeting erupted almost instantly. Not muffled debates, not controlled negotiations. Screams. Howls. Voices so loud the chandeliers rattled loose from their chains and shattered against the marble. The corridors buckled with sound. My radio screeched with static. I announced myself again and again, my voice cracking, begging for acknowledgement that came in shrieks and laughter. At 2:12 a.m., the eastern corridor doors slammed open by themselves. And I saw me. I was standing there, 20 feet away. My uniform. My notebook. My flashlight. My head lowered, posture rigid. Perfectly identical. It raised its chin, just enough that I could see its mouth. And it smiled. Security patrol, it said, in my voice. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My rosary snapped in my hands, beads scattering across the floor. Requesting permission to proceed, it said again, still smiling. The folded paper pulsed like fire in my pocket. I gripped it with shaking fingers, the edges digging into my flesh. My breath came ragged. I was breaking, the rules were shattering like glass around me. I ripped the paper open. Inside was a single word. A name I cannot write here, because even remembering the shape of it makes my ears bleed. The letters swam, burned, crawled across the page. I forced my tongue to shape them. I spoke the name. The sound didn't come from me, it came from everywhere. From the walls, the floor, the air itself. The marble cracked under my feet. The stained glass windows exploded outward. And my double, me, screamed. A scream in my own voice, shrill, ragged, breaking as its skin split, its shape crumbling inward like ash caught in a storm. Then silence. Total silence. When dawn came, the attendees left broken, limping, bleeding shadows of themselves. None spoke. None even glanced my way. Only the boots stopped. You opened it, the voice said, almost reverent. And yet you live. Fascinating. I tried to answer, but my mouth was filled with blood. The boots lingered. Do you know what you've done, Tomaso? You didn't just banish. You invited. And then they turned, vanishing into the storm. Benedetto found me at my post, pale and trembling, the shredded slip still clutched in my fist. You spoke it, he whispered. I nodded, unable to form words. He closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. Then it has begun. What has? I croaked. He looked at me with despair deeper than any I had seen. The end of the rules. The night after I spoke the name, the world no longer looked the same. Rome felt bruised. The air was thicker, almost viscous, as though sound itself was dragged through molasses. The Tiber ran sluggish, its waters darker than ink. Even the tourists, so endless and loud, walked more quietly that week, as if they too felt something hanging in the air. But inside the Vatican, silence had teeth. Benedetto hardly left his office. I saw him only once, 3 nights later. His cassock hung loose, his eyes red-rimmed and sunken. He looked like a man already preparing for burial. You spoke it, he said, voice brittle. Yes. He nodded slowly. Then it heard you. I wanted to ask what it was. But he turned his back, and I knew I would get no answer. The next meeting approached with a dread I could not mask, not even in my logbook. My notes were messier than usual, margins filled with scratches where my pen had pressed too hard. Announce. Count. Eyes down. Distance. The words bled into each other. At midnight, the arrivals began. But something was wrong. The polished shoes were scuffed, the shine dulled as if dragged through ash. Their gait was limping. No greeting came. The clicking toenails were slower, irregular. A few clicks missed entirely, as if some toes had been lost. The scaled feet dragged, scales dull and flaking, leaving behind a trail of powder that shimmered faintly in the low light. And then, the boots. Always gleaming. Always silent. Always whole. They stopped before me, as though they had been waiting. "You feel it, don't you?" the voice asked. I clenched my jaw. "Yes." "Good," it murmured. "Awareness is the first stage." "The first stage of what?" I asked, breaking protocol without realizing it. A pause. Then a chuckle, warm, almost approving. "Inheriting." And then it passed. Inside the hall, the voices were louder than ever. Not debate, screams. Shouts in languages that splintered my ears, that made the chandeliers rattle against their chains. At 1:15 a.m., the lights went out. Not a flicker. Gone. This time, my flashlight didn't even bother to turn on. Its beam was swallowed the moment it left the bulb. The corridor stretched before me, endless. Shadows layered over shadows until depth itself unraveled. "Security patrol," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Requesting acknowledgement." For a moment, silence. Then a whisper, soft, coiling into my ear like smoke. "Permission, inherited." It wasn't acknowledgement. It was recognition. I fell to my knees, the rosary beads biting into my palm, and pressed my forehead to the cold marble. I didn't know whether I was praying or begging. At 2:33 a.m., the oak doors shuddered violently. A crack split the wood, wide enough for a sliver of light, or something worse, to leak through. I raised my radio, but all I heard was my own voice screaming through the static. I froze. The folded slip of paper was gone. I checked every pocket, tore through my notes, searched the floor. Nothing. Something had taken it. And then I realized, I didn't need it anymore. I had already spoken the name. And once spoken, names are never forgotten. The meeting dragged past dawn. The attendees left in silence, broken, fragmented, shadows of themselves. Except the boots. They stopped at my post, silent for a long time. I could feel the weight of something above me, vast and immense, though my eyes never dared to rise. "You spoke the name," the voice said softly. And it answered. "That means you are no longer a guard, Tomaso." My throat closed. What am I? Another long silence. Then. A door. When I staggered to Benedetto's office, he was waiting. His face was pale, lips trembling. "Did it speak to you?" he asked. I nodded. He collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "Then it has begun. The rules are unraveling. You are no longer outside them. You are inside." My heart pounded so violently I thought my ribs would snap. "What does that mean?" His eyes lifted to mine, hollow and wet. "It means the next meeting will not be contained." The days leading up to the next gathering felt wrong in ways I couldn't name. Rome itself seemed thinner. I walked past fountains I had known my whole life and the water no longer sounded like water, it was thicker, heavier, like something crawling up the pipes instead of flowing down. The bells of St. Peter's tolled, but their echoes didn't fade, they lingered, vibrating inside my teeth long after the ringing stopped. Even my apartment wasn't safe. At night, my own voice whispered to me from the dark corners. Not words, just breathing. Ragged, in sync with mine, but not mine. I barely slept. I drank coffee until my hands shook. I kept the rosary, even broken, by my bedside, though the beads cut my palms when I clutched it in terror. And the paper. The folded slip with the forbidden name, it never came back. It didn't need to. I had already spoken what was inside, and the echo of it was carved into me like a brand. On the night of the meeting, the storm began early. The sky split with lightning before midnight. Rain hammered the stained glass with such force I thought it might shatter. The corridors trembled, plaster flaking from the ceiling. I arrived hours early, but my checks were useless. The lamps wouldn't light. The radios spat only my own voice back at me when I tested them. The thermometer shattered in my pocket before I even reached the first patrol point. The rules were failing before the gathering even began. At midnight, the attendees arrived. But they did not arrive as before. The polished shoes stumbled, soles torn, the shine gone completely. Their voice was cracked, frayed. "Guard, this place will not hold." The clicking toenails came scuttling next, but half of them were missing, the clicks uneven and broken. One of them left streaks of something black across the marble. The scaled feet followed, but the scales hung loose, falling like dead leaves, scattering the corridor with iridescent powder that hissed when it touched the ground. And then, the boots. Still perfect. Still gleaming. Still silent. They stopped before me. "It begins tonight," the voice said. "Come. Gentle. Almost triumphant." "Begins, what?" I asked before I could stop myself. The boots lingered. The breaking of the cage. The rules have rotted. You felt it. You know it. I lowered my eyes, forcing my voice steady. "Security patrol." Escort acknowledged. A chuckle. "Still clinging to rituals, even when they collapse around you. Admirable. But pointless." And then they entered the hall. The meeting did not begin with words. It began with screams. Not human screams. Not even animal. Screams that shook the air itself, screams that made the stained glass crack and the marble shiver beneath my boots. The oak doors groaned, their hinges bending. Light, red, unnatural, spilled from the cracks. I stumbled back, my notebook shaking in my hands. I wanted to log it, but my pen wouldn't move. My fingers cramped, frozen. Then came the first sound from the corridors. Footsteps. Many. Too many. I turned, and saw them. Attendees who had already entered the hall, now walking the corridors again. But wrong. Doubling. Tripling. Their feet blurred, splitting into many, dragging behind them like shadows untethered. "Security patrol," I croaked, throat raw. "Requesting acknowledgement." The reply came from all directions. From every mouth. From every wall. Acknowledged. The sound nearly broke me. I fled to the eastern wing, though I knew I shouldn't. My instincts screamed to avoid it. But it didn't matter, every path now led there. The building itself was shifting, reshaping into a maze with only one destination. And in the eastern corridor, I saw what waited. A figure taller than any ceiling, hunched to fit within the Vatican walls. Its feet were bare, cracked, twitching. Its hands scraped the marble, long nails screeching sparks. Its head, if it had one, was wrapped in veils that bled with every flicker of lightning. It spoke. Not aloud, but inside my skull. "Door." My knees buckled. I realized, then, what Benedetto had meant. I wasn't a guard anymore. I was the threshold. At 3 a.m., the oak doors to the hall burst open. The attendees spilled out, fighting, tearing at each other with hands, feet, claws I hadn't seen before. Their rules were gone, no distance, no neutrality. They clawed, bit, shrieked in a dozen tongues. I pressed myself to the wall, screaming the rules like prayers. Eyes down. 2 meters. Announce. Announce. But nothing answered. The boots emerged last, untouched. Gleaming. Silent. They stopped at my post, though chaos raged around us. You see now, the voice said softly. The rules do not protect. They delay. And delays always end. What do you want from me? I begged. The boots leaned closer. I smelled sulfur, blood, rain. Not what I want. What you want. I shook my head. I want this to stop. The chuckle was almost kind. Then open wider, Tomaso. A door cannot choose what passes through. It can only decide whether to stay shut or not. And then the boots left, stepping calmly into the chaos as if it bowed to them. At dawn, the Vatican was silent. Too silent. The attendees were gone. No footsteps, no echoes. Only marble dust, blood smeared across glass, chandeliers shattered on the floor. Benedetto found me slumped in the corridor, clutching my broken rosary like a dead limb. It has started, he whispered, his voice hollow. They will not contain themselves anymore. His eyes were wet, terrified. And you, Tomaso, you must decide. Door, or lock. The days after that meeting stretched like a fever dream. Rome itself bore scars no one seemed to notice but me. Shadows clung to buildings longer than sunlight should allow. Statues in the piazzas turned ever so slightly each morning, their faces never quite pointing the same way twice. Even the fountains bubbled with a metallic tang, staining the stone red-brown, though tourists still tossed coins into them with laughter. I walked among them, but I was not one of them anymore. Their world was no longer mine. Because I carried the name inside me now. And every night, when I tried to sleep, I felt it stir. Benedetto called me to his office only once. He looked half dead, his robes hanging like burial shrouds, his hands trembling too violently to hold his cup of wine. You are unraveling, he told me. I'm holding, I lied. He shook his head. You are not the guard anymore. You are the seam. And the seam is tearing. What do I do? I asked, my voice cracking. He slid a small leather-bound journal across his desk. The cover was cracked, the pages brittle. This was given to me when I was young, he whispered. I was told never to read past the final page. Only to pass it on. Now it is yours. I didn't want to touch it. But my hands moved on their own, dragging it into my possession. It will tell you what the rules cannot, he said. But you must decide if you want to know. His eyes, sunken, wet, met mine. And if you choose to open it, Tomaso, you can never go back. The November gathering came without storm, without warning. The air itself felt like it was waiting. At midnight, the attendees arrived. But not all of them. The polished shoes never appeared. Neither did the clicking toenails. Only the scaled feet entered, dragging slowly, their scales peeling away like bark stripped from wood. Their entourage followed, limping, bent, silent. And then, boots. Always boots. Always gleaming. They stopped in front of me, their silence longer this time. The voice came calm, low, soaked with inevitability. Tonight is not negotiation. Tonight is reckoning. Then the boots moved on, entering the hall alone. Inside, the voices did not debate. They howled. Through the oak doors came guttural roars, shrieks that rattled the stained glass until one window cracked fully, a spiderweb splitting the face of a saint. I pressed my back to the wall, gripping my logbook. But my hands wouldn't move to write. The pen snapped between my fingers. At 2:14 a.m., the hall doors burst open and something crawled out. Not walked, crawled. Bare feet bent backwards, nails digging into the marble like talons. Its body hunched and twisted, its face veiled in black cloth soaked with a dark liquid that dripped as it moved. It turned toward me. "Security patrol," I choked, forcing the words out. "Requesting acknowledgement." The figure paused. Then it spoke with my voice. "Acknowledged." I staggered back, fumbling for the leather-bound journal Benedetto had given me. My hands shook as I opened it, the pages brittle, filled with rules written in dozens of hands across decades. Some I recognized: never turn your back. Speak only when spoken to. But deeper inside, later entries twisted into desperate scrawls. If it wears your voice, keep silent. If it wears your face, close your eyes. If it wears your thoughts, the sentence ended in a jagged tear where the page had been ripped out. The final page was blank, except for one sentence written in bold, shaky ink. The rules do not end. They change. At 3 a.m., the boots emerged from the hall. Alone. Their buckles gleamed, untarnished. They stopped at my post. "You see now, don't you?" the voice asked, soft, almost kind. "Rules aren't laws. They are bargains. And bargains expire." I forced myself to whisper, "What happens when they expire?" The boots lingered. The silence stretched so long I thought I might collapse under it. Then the voice answered, barely audible. "Then doors open." Dawn broke red over Rome, the sun bleeding across the horizon. The streets below were unusually empty. A dog barked in the distance, sharp, panicked, then cut off mid-howl. Benedetto met me in the corridor, his face pale as parchment. He saw the journal clutched in my hands and nodded slowly. "You opened it?" "Yes." "Then you understand." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He placed his hand on my shoulder, trembling. "Then Tomaso, my son, you must choose. Lock. Or door." And in that moment, with dawn burning red through the Vatican windows, I realized something with bone-deep certainty. I was already open. I no longer know if this is a confession, a record, or a curse. All I know is that it must be written. Because writing feels like the only way to keep my thoughts my own. The December gathering was the last. I felt it the moment I stepped into the Vatican. The air was different, stretched thin, vibrating with something alive. The marble under my boots hummed like a taut string. Even the torches along the walls flickered as though reluctant to burn. The rosary I carried crumbled in my hand before midnight, beads splitting into dust. And when the doors opened, the attendees did not enter one by one. They poured in. Shapes I did not recognize. Some crawling, some dragging themselves, some little more than shadows pressed into flesh. They filled the corridor, whispering in 100 tongues, their feet slapping, scraping, clicking, twitching. I tried to log them. My pen snapped after the first line. Inside the hall, the noise was indescribable. Not voices, not words, a storm of sound. The oak doors swelled, their wood splitting, fragments raining to the marble. Benedetto appeared beside me, though I hadn't seen him approach. His face was hollow, eyes sunken deep, but his voice was steady. "This is it, Tomaso," he said. "The rules are gone. Tonight decides everything." I gripped the leather journal. Am I the lock, or the door? He looked at me with a sadness so profound it carved itself into my chest. "You already know." At 1:44 a.m., the oak doors burst outward. The attendees poured into the corridors, tearing at one another, their forms splitting and doubling. Shadows bled across the walls, crawling into frescoes, distorting the painted saints into howling mouths. I pressed my back to the stone, screaming protocol into the chaos. 2 meters. Eyes down. announce. But my voice was swallowed whole. Something moved at the edge of the corridor. Tall. Veiled. Bare feet twitching backward. Nails dragging sparks on marble. It spoke inside my skull. Door. My knees buckled. I felt myself open. And then the boots appeared. Still perfect. Still gleaming. Still silent. They walked through the carnage untouched. Every creature bent, parted, shrieked but did not touch them. They stopped before me. You feel it, the voice said. Come. Certain. The cage has broken. You are the opening. My lips trembled. What passes through me? The boots leaned closer. Their voice was almost tender. Whatever wishes. I don't remember speaking. I don't remember opening my mouth. But I remember the sound. The name. The forbidden name. The one from the paper. It tore out of me, louder than thunder, louder than the storm of screams, echoing through every corridor, vibrating every pane of glass until the windows exploded outward into the Roman dawn. The ground split. Shadows poured upward, not down. The attendees shrieked, their forms dissolving, scattering into dust, smoke, ash. The boots did not move. They only stood. Watching. And then, they smiled. Welcome, the voice said. When I woke, I was alone. The hall was empty. The corridors silent. Even the marble dust had vanished. Only my notebook remained, open on the floor. Words scrawled across every page in my own hand. Words I do not remember writing. The rules do not end. They change. The rules do not end. They change. The rules do not end. They change. Over and over, until the ink bled through the paper. Benedetto is gone. His office empty, his wineglass shattered, his rosary left on the desk in a pile of dust. The Vatican is quiet now. Too quiet. But when I walk the streets of Rome, I see the signs. Statues shifting. Shadows too long. Strangers murmuring in voices that echo mine. Doors opening. Everywhere. And I know what I am. I am not guard. Not witness. Not lock. I am door. And once a door opens, it never truly closes.